Messy Bible moments, from unholy mess to holy mess.
David won. The rebellion was over. Absalom was dead. The throne was secured, and the king was upstairs in a chamber crying his eyes out. His army had risked everything for him that day, bled for him, fought for him, brought him back his kingdom. And their king couldn't stop weeping long enough to acknowledge it. Joab had to walk in and tell David the hard truth. Get up, go out, and speak to your people. Because if you don't, nobody who loves you will be standing with you by morning. David got up, dried his face, went to the gate. But beloved, he was not the same man who had left Jerusalem barefoot and weeping weeks before. Consequences have a way of doing that. They don't just punish you, they change you. So the king arose and sat in the gate. 2 Samuel 19:8. Here's where it gets politically interesting. All of Israel had followed Absalom. They had chosen the wrong side, supported the rebellion, and now their king was coming back, and nobody was quite sure how to handle that. The tribes of Israel were whispering among themselves, "Why hasn't anyone said anything about bringing the king back?" Meanwhile, David sent word specifically to the priests. "Tell the elders of Judah, you are my own flesh and blood. Why are you the last ones talking about bringing me home? Because David knew something every leader knows. Returning to power after a crisis requires the people to choose you again. You cannot just walk back in. Restoration requires reconciliation, and reconciliation requires someone to make the first move. So David started making moves. And King David sent to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, saying, "Speak unto the elders of Judah." 2 Samuel 19:11. Remember Shimei, the man who threw rocks and curses at David when he was fleeing Jerusalem? He came back, fast. He brought 1,000 men from Benjamin with him and threw himself face down in the dirt before David at the Jordan River. He said, "Don't hold my sin against me. I know I did wrong. I'm the first one of the whole house of Joseph to come meet you today." And Abishai, who had wanted to cut his head off last time, said, "Shouldn't this man die for what he did to God's anointed?" And David said, "No, nobody dies in Israel today. Today is a day of restoration. Now let me be clear. David didn't forget what Shimei did. He told Solomon about it on his deathbed. But in this moment, David chose the long game. He chose restoration over retaliation, because a leader who comes home looking for revenge doesn't deserve the throne they're returning to. And the king said, "Thou shalt not die." And the king sware unto him. 2 Samuel 19:23. Then there was Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, the young man David had shown covenant kindness to for Jonathan's sake. When David had fled Jerusalem, Mephibosheth had not come with him, and his servant Ziba had told David that Mephibosheth stayed behind, hoping to reclaim his grandfather Saul's kingdom. But now, Mephibosheth came to meet David and told a completely different story. He said, "Ziba deceived me. I told him to saddle my donkey so I could go with you, and he left without me. He lied about me to you." David looked at this man, unkempt, unwashed, clearly in distress, and had to decide who was telling the truth. He couldn't know for certain. So he split the land between them, and Mephibosheth said, "Let him take it all. You came home safely. That's enough for me." Loyalty sounds like that sometimes. Quiet, undemanding, just glad the right person survived. And Mephibosheth said, "Yea, let him take all, for as much as my lord the king is come again in peace." 2 Samuel 19:30. One of the most quietly beautiful moments in this whole story is Barzillai. Barzillai was an 80-year-old wealthy man who had brought supplies to David during his exile: food, bedding, everything the king needed while he was on the run. No political calculation, just faithful generosity toward a king in trouble. David said, "Come with me to Jerusalem. Let me take care of you for the rest of your life." And Barzillai said, "I'm 80 years old. I can't taste food anymore. Can't hear music. I'd just be a burden to you. Let me go home and die near my own city, near the grave of my father and mother." He wasn't bitter. He wasn't angling for more. He just knew himself, knew his season, knew when to go home. David kissed him, blessed him, and let him go. There is something deeply holy about a person who knows their assignment, fulfills it completely, and then gracefully steps aside. So all the people went over Jordan, and the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him. 2 Samuel 19:39. And then, just when it seemed like the homecoming was going smoothly, the men of Israel and the men of Judah got into a full argument, right there at the Jordan River. In front of everybody, Israel said to Judah, "Why did you steal the king? We have more claim to David than you do. Why weren't we consulted?" And Judah fired back, "Because the king is our close relative. Why are you angry about it?" And Israel said, "We have 10 tribes. We have more of a claim than you do." They were arguing about who loved David most, while David was standing right there. Now, if that doesn't sound like every church split, every family falling out, every organizational breakdown you have ever witnessed in your life, I don't know what does. Because that's what happens when restoration doesn't come with genuine reconciliation. The cracks that were always there just find a new excuse to show themselves. And this argument was a seed. And seeds grow. And the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, "We hate eat." And right on cue, a troublemaker named Sheba blew a trumpet and shouted, "We have no part in David, neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel." And just like that, Israel walked away from David and followed Sheba. Just like that. One man with a trumpet and a bad attitude nearly undid an entire kingdom restoration in 60 seconds flat. David had barely crossed the Jordan, and already he had another rebellion on his hands. This one not from his son, from a nobody. A man the Bible describes as a worthless fellow, and David told Joab, "Sheba will do more damage to us than Absalom ever did. Get after him, now." Because David had learned something the hard way. You cannot let disorder fester. You cannot give chaos time to organize itself. The longer a rebellion breathes, the bigger it grows. Handle it. Fast. And Sheba blew a trumpet and said, "We have no part in David." And every man of Israel went up from after David and followed Sheba. 2 Samuel 20:1-2. David put a man named Amasa in charge of the army, replacing Joab, which was a bold move considering what Joab had just done for him. But David had his reasons. Joab did not take the demotion well. When Joab encountered Amasa on the road, he greeted him warmly, called him brother, reached out to kiss him, and stabbed him in the stomach while he was embracing him. Just like that. In broad daylight. On a public road. Joab was loyal to David, but he was loyal on his own terms. He would serve the king, but he was not going to be replaced, and he was not going to let anyone forget who had held things together when everything fell apart. Joab was the kind of person every leader has encountered. Indispensable, capable, and absolutely impossible to fully control. David never fully dealt with Joab in his lifetime, and that unfinished business became another thing he left to Solomon, 2 Samuel 29. Sheba had fled to a city called Abel Beth-Makkah, and Joab's army surrounded it and began building a siege ramp against the wall, and then a wise woman leaned over that wall and stopped everything. She called down to Joab, "Listen, this is a city that has been faithful to Israel for generations. Why are you trying to destroy it?" Joab said, "I don't want the city. I just want Sheba, who has rebelled against King David." And the woman said, "His head will be thrown over the wall to you." She went back inside and apparently had a very persuasive conversation with the people of that city, because they cut off Sheba's head and threw it over the wall to Joab. And just like that, the rebellion was over. Not because of military genius, not because of Joab's strategy. Because one unnamed wise woman asked the right question, made the right deal, and saved an entire city. The Bible doesn't even tell us her name, but God made sure her wisdom was recorded forever. 2 Samuel 20:22. And just like that, the kingdom was restored. The scripture wraps it up efficiently. Joab was over the army, Benaiah over the bodyguard, Adoram over the labor force, Jehoshaphat the recorder, Sheva the scribe, Zadok and Abiathar the priests, everything back in its place, the administration of a kingdom functioning again. But here is what I want you to notice. This restoration was not clean. It was not simple. It was not a triumphant parade back to a palace that looked exactly like it did before. It was complicated. It was messy. It was full of half-reconciled relationships, unresolved tensions, switched loyalties, and people who were back in position, but not necessarily back in alignment. Real restoration always looks like that. Not a movie ending. More like a beginning of the hard daily work of rebuilding what was broken. David was home, and home was different now, but home was home, and that was enough to build on. So Joab returned to Jerusalem unto the king. 2 Samuel 20:22. David was back on the throne. The kingdom was functioning. The rebellions were over. But nothing was the same. He had a son in a grave in the forest of Ephraim. He had relationships that had been strained and switched and patched back together with the fragile thread of political necessity. He had an army commander who had killed 2 men in cold blood and was still running his military. He had come home, but home had changed, and so had he. The grief doesn't disappear just because the crisis is over. The consequences don't evaporate just because the throne is recovered. You bring all of it with you, the wisdom and the wounds. But here is the grace. David was still writing psalms, still seeking God, still leading, still building. What broke him did not finish him, and what broke you will not finish you either. And David came to his house at Jerusalem, 2 Samuel 23. Restoration is rarely a clean moment. David came home, but he came home changed, humbled, carrying grief alongside his crown. And that is exactly what God does. He doesn't restore you to who you were before. He restores you to something deeper, someone who has been through the fire and come out knowing what matters and what doesn't. If you are in a season of coming home, to God, to yourself, to your calling, know this: it will be messy. Some people will be glad you're back. Some things will never go back to exactly what they were. But God is in the restoration business, not the renovation business. He doesn't just patch what was broken. He builds something new on the foundation of everything you survived. Your best chapters are not behind you. They are being written right now, in the middle of everything that feels unfinished. And honey, if you think coming home was complicated, just wait until you see what was still waiting for David once he got there. He got